everybody. Well, again, thanks for coming out tonight. Hopefully you'll pick up both these books after if you haven't read them, because it's a perfect, and we're heading into summer, and I know people like to think, oh, summer reads. That by no means is dismissive. It just happens to be a time that we have more time to read, hopefully, right? So I'm just going to crack on, because this is about thrillers, crime novels, murder stuff, you know. So the first question is, I have to ask you to have written quite a few books between the two of you, where you off quite a few people. Do you think you could get away with it in real life? Amber, let's start with you, because you're looking like cat that swallowed the canary.
I think Dan has more expertise in many areas than I do, but in that way. But I honestly don't, because I couldn't. I don't think I could stop myself from revealing it somehow. I'm the worst poker player.
Right. So there's no good. The line for you is on the page, is it? Your characters.
Yeah, they live in this world that I've built, and I feel like when I write, sometimes it's as if I'm playing a game, so that's not that the characters have no consequence. Like, of course they do, I'm so invested in them, but it's like, I'm not thinking about the grisly details of loss, right? Like, yeah, what it would really mean.
Okay, Dan, what about, I know you are a physician as well, so probably not the best person to ask the question about how are you on murder.
Well, no, I have means, right? So that's good. But, I can't get away with, like, getting into the cookies or whatever without, like, I leave a trail of the blood stains I would leave if I tried to murder somebody. There'd be like bloody footprints out to my car. So I don't think, I could probably think of the way, but I would screw up some detail. I'm not detail focused about that stuff. Probably not a great admission for an emergency doctor, but sure.
Yeah, just everybody feeling okay right now?
Yeah.
So we're all good? Okay, good. That's funny, because we always see in these, I don't know if there's so much TV shows now, but maybe going back to further sort of the crime, the small, I always thought never live in a small town, never live in Oxford in England, because everybody's getting murdered there and all this stuff. But it's funny, they always find the authors in these, right? That are always, that's who did it. So I'm glad to know that you guys are not up to no good. So one thing I wanted to talk about you two tonight too is place. Dan, you've moved your stories around quite a bit. We've been, I think my most recent books of yours I've read, I've been to way up in Alaska, Seattle, I guess. Now the latest one, we're in Laguna Beach, California, very posh, Real Housewives of Orange County people, right? Yeah. Do you watch Real Housewives of Orange County? No. Just kidding. Well, I do. No, I have, sorry. So, and Amber, your books are always almost like we're in an Emily Carr painting, where the dark and, yeah. So let's start with you, Dan. Maybe let's talk about location for you and how that works.
Yeah, for me, setting is rarely, occasionally, I wrote books about Shanghai, and setting was everything. It was a huge part of the story. It was a historical series about Shanghai, but oftentimes it's just what fits the story. And this story, as you know, is about these very high-functioning celebrities, some of them VIP, people, all high-functioning addicts working in this, out there ketamine therapy. That just screams of California, Southern California. And I wanted a kind of closed door, because the group is very much a closed door mystery. So I wanted the setting that's, a very basically insular setting. Like, I love Laguna Beach, it's beautiful, but it's, it's not demographically heterogeneous. It's not, it's wealthy people, it's beautiful setting. And so I really wanted, for me, it was the perfect setting to fit the story. And so that's often how I choose.
I'm so excited to read this one. You had me a closed-door mystery. That is a genre that I cannot resist, and if it's by you, I'm all over it. I can't wait to get my copy. I think this whole region that we live in is so sort of inherently, but not disturbingly eerie. It has such an eeriness always. Not always. There are sunny, beautiful days where you're like, oh, wow, this is not a rainforest. But I live in Squamish, so I live north of here, and, the moss hangs low, and I live right beside a river. You never know what's in your backyard. There's something really inspiring about that for me. And also, honestly, sometimes my books, they capture, anxieties I have. And what's outside in the darkness is something that freaks me out sometimes. And it, like, place feels really integrated with that. That's why I write like that.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Amber's definitely going to kill somebody. I just get that feeling.
Yeah. Well, she knows where to hide a body with
Yeah.
all the places she's been. Well, let's just step off into your latest one, the off season. We are in this very dark place. We're sort of a little bit east of Chilliwack, and everybody that's from around here will remember the atmospheric river we had of a few years ago, and that plays a big role in this. It's a lovely, fancy hotel, but a very scary hotel, as it turns out, on the edge of the river. That the river becomes a character at one point in this, and is going to take over. And so maybe talk about pulling, and Dan, we'll come to you about this because you're an expert at pulling from real life. So can you talk about that experience of that time that we all remember, and the flooding of the whole Fraser Valley, and when that tweaked to you, oh, I can kill a bunch of people here?
Again, internal anxieties. I think I could trace a lot of my plots and twists back to the things that give me fear.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 kids and like a husband, and I was away at the Whistler Writers Festival, which isn't that far away from where I live, because I live in Squamish, but I didn't usually leave to go overnight. And as I was driving into Whistler, my phone started pinging with all like these emergency alerts. All of the rivers are like surging, and it scared me so deeply. I was like, should I turn around? Should I go home? Should I whatever? So it was something that I was like, oh, in order to work through this, possibly, like, I must put this into a story. It was such a like powerful time, and like we have now these events that are like once in a lifetime events that are happening all the time, and that's going to be true for us, unfortunately, I think. So it's something that I felt like when the environment tells you a story, maybe you can repeat something at a remote hotel in a wilderness setting.
It's a very nice hotel, though. And one of the things I loved about your book is how well you described the hotel. Like, I felt like I was really in there, and in those nice rooms, and all of a sudden, oh, the bad rooms. Not the nice rooms. Well, we might as well stay on this thread about, and then we'll come to you, Dan, about this as well. But Amber, stay on this thread with you about real life coming into it. In the book, and with these guys, obviously, I can't tell you a lot of stuff, or all the questions that I would ask them, because we've all read the books and get deeper, but I don't want to give it away. There's a big chunk of this, though, is a situation we're all living in now, is everybody living their lives online and wanting to make a living by being famous, influencer culture, I guess, for lack of a better term. And in your story here, it's the YouTube prank guys. We all know, the guy's the word I want to use, but we're in polite company, those guys. And you have that in your book. And so I just wanted, from a research standpoint, because, I've interviewed you a couple times over the years, I just don't see you hanging around YouTube and watching guys, crack their heads open on railings and stuff. So tell me a little bit about going down that rabbit hole, and what that was like for you. There you go.
Slow mic. It was, okay, so my bio includes the phrase that my search history is highly questionable. Like, holy, still now, months later, am I getting the most awful things on YouTube as prompts? And yeah, I did have, I don't need a lot of, especially like dark stuff, to get an idea going. So I didn't do a huge dive into all of the cracks and crevices of YouTube, but I definitely went to places that I was like, oh, I really wish that I hadn't seen this. That's kind of true for me in a lot of ways. And my YouTube came into my story again because this is something I'm like trying to figure out with my kids, like one of whom is like, that's the #1 app that she wants to download, YouTube, and it freaks me out so badly. Like these are things you can't unsee. So I wanted to show, the places as a culture, like, we are starting to go, and maybe we don't have to. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to see, because there's more talk about it every day, and the legislation and speak about stuff like that. But and you nailed it with those. Again, I can't tell him anything. All right. What can I say? But Dan, let's move. Go ahead.
I was going to say about Amber's book, it's incredibly atmospheric. Like,
Yeah.
I got such strong Shining vibes when, it has that kind of same kind of feeling. And I was like, yeah, no, and it's amazing. You do it really, really well, with what you can do with atmosphere in and all.
Dan, thank you. I appreciate that a lot. When I pitched this book, I pitched it as The Shining, but make it a woman, which was really enticing to the publisher, but that was literally all I had, just that. I hadn't written a single other word of it, which I've never done before. I've always had a manuscript in hand and just been editing something once the deal is made, and I thought I would love doing a book like that. Like, oh, I'm so, coveted, like they really want my book.
Yeah, but by the way, for those aspiring writers in the author, don't do that.
No.
Don't.
No, it's not fun. And it's a lot of early 4 a.m.s and late nights, but it's sometimes I think you go out on a limb, and I'm glad I went out on this one.
Once you pitch that and their ears perked up, lack of imagination, not any offense towards you, but they're like, oh my God, give us a Stephen King as fast as you can. Was that pressure a lot, or did you hear back saying, oh, can you make it a little bit more? Can you kill somebody in the kitchen with an axe? I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking of all the Shining stuff.
Yeah, amp up the references to film, which was really fun because I ended up like that was research I really enjoyed for this. Like, try to draw parallels in story. She, like, my main character is a documentary filmmaker, very well versed. So it was like find examples of women who have been taken to remote locations and put in peril. And like unsurprisingly, there are many, many, many to draw from. But yeah, I started watching all of those movies, and that was really a good way to do the research. But sorry, I kind of lost the thread there.
No, because your hotel is it the Overlook or the Overreach in The Shining, right? It's very much like that because, as I said earlier, you do such a good job of describing each room we move through, whether she's running or the first time they get in the hotel, overlooking it. That it is. I know it sounds a bit cliche, but it is such a character in this area. And and even when you get to the other guy's farm down the road or his house down the road, and we'll just anyways, it's great. So Daniel, let's move to you because you are the king of, and I know zeitgeist. Let's just say it. You either have something you've written about something that's just about to land in front of all of us, or it just has. So, where's your magic ball? Are you going to show us? Like, what is your crystal ball? I should say. How do you know this?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't see trends coming. So lately, the last number of, I started my gimmick, into the publishing world was that I had the medical background, and I knew some of the medical background. But lately, I've just been looking for interesting topics that interest me. And I know we had a great discussion about this, and with this book, psychedelics fascinate me. Like, they have such an incredible history. There's never been a drug, and arguably, well, for sure, a medication that has been so stigmatized in society by one way or the other, You go back to the history of LSD, which was the most promising drug in the 1960s in psychiatry, and then it got seconded by by Timothy, not just by Timothy Leary, but by the flower. It became this recreational drug, and then it got confused.
Right? And those guys,
all those guys.
People started getting high, Dan. Just tell them and going out.
They did. No, they did. But it sort of that overshadowed, eclipsed all the promise that it showed as a very useful drug for certain conditions in mental health. And then Richard Nixon had a personal vendetta for Timothy Leary and the general, and he classified it without any evidence with drugs like heroin and cocaine, and research on it disappeared for 50 years, and it was only an illicit drug. And now it's come, all that class of medications, I see in my work and in my life, and I know so many people who experiment with it, and it was just fascinating to me. And indigenous cultures have known about it for thousands of years, have known about psychedelics, and so I thought, wow, this is a ripe topic.
Well, just talk about it a little bit, because for people who don't know, Dan is an ER doctor at St. Paul's, and you've, I've been in St. Paul's ER a few times. I don't know if any of you have. That's a wild place to sit for 5 or 6 hours. You see, so I imagine you've seen just about everything. So I'd like you to, if you could, talk about about the psychedelics now, and when people, what you've seen with it coming in over the years, and how you feel about it versus all the other, I don't know, drugs we're seeing.
Yeah. Well, Ben, this, people ask me, can I fictionalize my work? But you can't fictionalize St. Paul's Emergency because no one would believe
No.
like a word of it. If I wrote it completely as I saw it, people would go, well, he's gone off the deep end on that. But one thing I tell people that's interesting is I've seen, opioids have been one of the most devastating epidemics to ever hit. I mean, just the amount of death and tragedy they call insurmountable. Alcohol causes so much damage and issues. Cocaine causes cardiac illness and bad decisions. And you go down the list. The one thing we never, and we see a lot of people come in with weed, marijuana toxicity, either paranoia or intractable vomiting. The one thing we never see are people coming in saying, I've done too many magic mushrooms, or I've done too much LSD. For all the myths out there about people jumping out of windows because they think they can fly, it's a remarkably benign form of, recreational drug compared to almost all the other ones. So, yeah, so we don't see it. I use a form of psychedelic called ketamine. It's one of the drugs we use most for procedures. But now it's being used in therapy. It's for, for PTSD, for depression, for all kinds of incredible things. But, we use it just to sedate people so we can reduce dislocated shoulders or,
Right.
do other procedures we need to do in the emerge department.
So the bad info just had better PR, as it seems to be the case we're experiencing in life again right now, isn't it? But let's talk about the addicts in this group, and we'll speak about in a second about the closed door factor of this. And if you're fans of Agatha Christie, you'll love this one because it's got that. People get picked off, like dear old Agatha did such a good job of. Can you talk about the addicts in this book, because you are set in Laguna Beach. These are all very high functioning people for the most part. I said the rock star guy's a little bit. I didn't like him at all. But they're all either they've got a lot of dough, or they're next to someone with a lot of dough. And what struck me when I read that is you're telling us something about addicts. So I'm going to let you say it, otherwise I'm going to ramble on. So why did you want to choose the? We live in Vancouver. We all see a lot of this stuff right up close.
Well, we do and we don't. And first of all, I don't mean to diminish what we do at St. Paul's is very important. There are real people suffering in near here, downtown East Side. Addiction is an awful illness. But my point, and I tried to make it in other books I've written, like The Last High, is that it is not one particular demographic. It strikes all over. And people who have the most means and the most support are the most likely to be able to hide it and live with addiction in a functional way for years. And that's what this is all about, 7 addicts whose lives are all completely screwed up because of their addiction, but they're wealthy, they're famous in some cases, and they still have all the trappings of a good life, but they're all hiding, dark, bad secrets, as you know. And so that was my message, was that, you don't judge a book by the cover. And it was really fun to pit them. I've heard a lot of people, some of the negative feedback I've heard about the book is that there's too many unlikable characters, but I didn't, except for maybe the rock star, I didn't see any of them as unlikable. I saw them as all, very conflicted and complex in my mind. They might come across as one-dimensional to you, but to me, they were sort of these complex characters that, some amorality and some just sort of ambivalence.
I also always wonder, why does it matter whether they're likable or unlikable? Does it matter? Like, to me, I'm not seeking a bud when I'm reading a book. I don't mind an unlikable narrator at all. But sometimes I feel like I fall in the minority, and it's like a curious thing, because you can show flaws and show complexity, and I think you do that so well. And the challenges of relationships in those ways too, how that kind of all works in terms of like the behind the scenes when you're trying to figure something out. It's really like, you do it so well. But I think that when you have like so many characters doing bad things, sometimes they have good reasons, right?
It's definitely going to kill somebody, but no, I totally agree. And look like shows like Succession. I mean, they're not remotely likable.
Yeah.
People love that show. You look at Hannibal Lecter, one of the most famous characters in literature.
Well,
There's
he's got someone who likes him a lot right now, though.
Oh yeah. A very
Somebody's
likable
singing his
guy
praises
likes him. But yeah, but you know, and we were just talking before, people like our mutual friend Robin Harding, who often writes unlikable characters, incredibly popular. Sherry LaPena, one of Canada's preeminent thriller writers, her characters are I mean, it doesn't have to be likable. They have to be interesting, and they have to be relatable to a degree, you know, and you can root for them, you can root against them. But yeah, I'm with you. I think it's boring to have just likable people.
Well, no, we'd be, yeah. But don't you think it's funny when you have a group, looking at those 7 people that you call the tribe in this novel, do you think that people might not like some of them because they know some of them? Do you think that that happens? And maybe also with the connection with addiction, there's a lot of family stuff with people that they've tried or hasn't worked out or something's happened that, I mean, that's what I find sometimes. I just always want them to, I like to actually even be worse sometimes just because, you know, it lets you off the hook about yourself.
But you know, but the hero of this novel is not one of the, she's the psychiatrist whose life was saved as a teenager after her father died in the car accident, and she has no memory of it. She was in the car. She sorts of blames herself, and her grandfather takes her to Peru on an ayahuasca retreat, and it changes her life. And now she becomes passionate and arguably blinded and fanatical about psychedelics. And I found her to write a very likable character, but she makes a lot of questionable life choices, and I think that irritated people, right?
Yeah,
and then sort of, but you know, to me, it makes her more sympathetic. But
well, it's interesting. You're both sitting here because your main character has an ethics issue coming in, and Dan, you said to me before that Holly, who is the psychiatrist, in this, is the most damaged character you ever written, and in your book, and I guess with yours as well, they're sort of teetering between being unethical and groundbreaking at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd imagine as a physician, you've probably seen that or feel that, or I don't know, man, I'm putting words in your mouth. Dan, have you been up to no good in a lab somewhere?
Definitely seen unethical. Not sure about groundbreaking.
But do you guys see that? Because your filmmaker has run into an ethical problem, so.
Yeah, in a really, I try to make it very like as ambiguous as possible, right? Like, so these things that we have to decide as humans. Sometimes I worry because I do often I do like the characters that everyone starts to say, oh, that's such an unlikable character. I'm like, really? What about this though? And then I'm like, am I just an unlikable person, you know? But I think that moral ambiguity, the weird decisions that we have to make that we encounter, and also what's inside of us, that's an interesting part of a story. That's always, to me, the most interesting part of stories when I learn them about people, because life is very complex, and I think it's weird to be like, there's one person that we all like, and they know exactly what to do every single time something happens, including moments of great peril, right?
Yeah. No, I think you did that. You made her incredibly vulnerable in that story, and I found her more likable because she, you know, and you know, the redemption story is the oldest novel in the world, and you can't have a redemption story if you start off, you know,
everybody's happy.
If you start off well adjusted at the beginning.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I really loved Jane. I thought she had this character about her that was it was understandable to me very much. She just couldn't back down from things, and it brought her she's constantly doubling down on this piece of her life that she's just unsure if she did the right thing, but she has to be sure that she did the right thing, or else everything else will kind of fall apart.
Well, you gave Jane a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
For starters, her career's fallen apart. She's fallen in love with a guy after a minute and a half in a restaurant abroad.
How could she resist?
Yeah, how could she? She moves to an isolated place way up the Fraser Valley that's going to be closed for the winter with this guy she hardly knows, and his disgruntled teenage daughter. See? Did you hear the couple of
who she's never met.
And they're doing renovations.
Yeah, he's a handyman.
What else could go wrong?
Yeah.
And it does, but poor Jane.
Yeah, I mean, but she makes all those decisions on her own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that people have often questioned in the book, which again, to me, was very understandable. You know, she was at this moment where she needed to take an extreme pivot, and she did that as hard as she could. And so it was sure, hotel, sure, let's get married, sure, let's be a stepmother to somebody I've never met.
Mm. What about lines and crossing lines for you guys? I mean, do you have parameters? Are there somewhere you won't go, something you won't do? Have you been asked maybe by publishers or people like,
Oh, man.
I don't know. I mean, like you said, you're like Liam Neeson. You have a specific set of talents, right? Or skills.
Skills.
Skills. Sorry. You know, I'm curious about what would stop you.
Violence against children.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That question brought the room down, didn't
Sorry.
it? no, I did. That was my fault.
That's like a no-go zone for me.
Yeah.
But what does a publisher ask me to do? That's a whole other question.
Wow. Yeah, no, I've never been asked to do or not do. Yeah, I think sort of gratuitous violence and cruelty that doesn't serve a purpose or doesn't. I don't like reading about that. I'm not going to write about that.
Right.
But otherwise, no. Everything else is pretty much game.
Everybody else gonna. What about when you're reading other? I know you guys have read each other's books, but when you're reading somebody else's, crime novel, thriller, or whatever, are you figuring it out right from the get-go? Do you get distracted by your writer's brain, or are you able to check out?
Just a note. One of the things I really like, many of the things I like about your book is that you don't go into like this kind of gratuitous violence because it's so. I don't like that either. But I think you should take this question. I don't. I gotta think through.
About other authors.
Well, when you're reading, like when you're reading for fun,
no, I
like
never.
A busman's holiday.
No, I never figure it out.
No.
Oh. Well, yeah, I shouldn't say never, but I hardly ever figure it out, and I don't even try to. Like,
so
you
don't try.
I don't
That's the
usually
question.
try.
So yeah, it's funny. And I don't. I think we all hate the kind of potted ending, like that. That doesn't give you any chance or don't. But I don't. To me, like as long as when you get the resolution and it makes sense when you look back at it, if I've liked the character, if I've been drawn in the story, that's what I'm happy with. I'm not, for me, I don't judge a book by how well somebody tricked me or didn't trick me. If they have a fantastic twist in it, but I don't really, relate to the characters. That's 8 hours of my time for one twist.
Jumping ahead at all.
I mean, my husband's probably like, "Are you kidding, Amber? You're the annoying person when you're watching movies, being like, it was that person. It was that person. I know it was that person."
Too.
Yeah, and I'm like, I only recently kind of realized that might be really annoying. But
So true.
yeah, in a book, I don't at all. Though, I mean, like once I get to, we're coming up to like the end, I'm like, okay, will my theory hold? Will this work? Like, and I want to be really surprised. I just really want that moment of the big reveal. I want that, so I don't try to like take it away from myself.
But I got a question for you and you, Dana. You're so well read. And I was at the Montreal Mystery Festival, and this whole topic came up. And I think it was one of the authors I was with on the panel, I can't remember who, was saying that it's getting to the point now where readers keep demanding more and more, so you get twist upon twist upon. And it, to me, sometimes it gets silly, right? Like, it's like you obviously want some suspense and tensions. Great if you can trick, you can kind of fool somebody with a good red herring and have a good twist that makes people think. But people, I think, keep trying to outdo each other, and then
it gets
you
tropey
lose,
after
you
a while,
lose
doesn't
the
it?
plot. To use a cliche.
I noticed that in TV series where I'm like, okay,
Absolutely.
well, this is only the first episode. I guess that can't be the murderer. Like, why are you doing this?
That is, sorry, but that's like, like those
that
British
bugs me.
TV shows
I'm
that I
down
love, but
with
you
you.
watch 10 episodes, the guy they focus on in the first 9
it's
is
like,
never
ugh.
the killer. And it's like, what's the point?
And it's also like, oh, that's an A-list celebrity. Well, then they're not going to die.
Yeah.
Plot armor, they're
I know.
not the one.
I know. I hope we haven't ruined anything for you, but I watched movies for 19 years for a job, and I'm like constantly, I'm like, and this is what's happening next. And my husband, the same thing, was just like.
Well, did
for
you
the-
figure out our books?
I'm just trying to think if I think that your one book I did figure out, and I was really happy I did, was the one set in Alaska, and I can't remember the male doctor, right? That one with his buddy who was selling shares in a company, right? I think I knew it was him. But I was okay with that, though, because I hate
Yeah,
to-
does that ruin a book?
No.
If you've, no.
I feel great. Are
Yeah.
you kidding me? I like to win.
Yeah, totally. You're like, oh, I figured it out. But I think I'm really poor at that also. Maybe that's why I don't try, because I'm actually not very good. I just got
I bet
really...
your subconscious is really good at it.
Well, maybe. Yeah, like, at some point I'm going to use that.
We were talking in the green room before we came out here tonight, and talking about Robin Harding's new book, which is out in the beginning of July, out in a week, called The Haters. And it's she's another Vancouver author, and it's all about a first-time author gets published and the online reviews, she gets review bombed and by sock puppets. You know what sock puppets are? Yeah, me neither till I learned this. Do you guys know what sock puppets are? So they're the people that you don't know who they are online that post these reviews and stuff. So it's just like a sock puppet. I think it was ruined sock puppets for me.
Your
Who doesn't?
love has been destroyed.
So the book is about this woman, this first-time published author, and just how it spirals and how she starts to engage. She makes the fatal mistake of engaging with the trolls. So it got me thinking about, we live in this. You have with the YouTube, and you and I have talked before about access and stuff, and to information, even doing research. We have so much more at our fingertips. So what's the world like for you now, where people can comment on your stuff so quickly and easily, or find you, or, I mean, yay, nay, you don't open it?
Well, I love this question because I have a friend in the audience, and she, many years ago, gave me a keychain, and it says, never read the comments.
Yeah.
And I just really try not to ever. I don't know why, but I tend to go on Goodreads when I'm feeling my absolute lowest. That I was like, why am I here? Right?
You do too.
It's so like self-flagellation. It's I don't really. I try really hard not to engage with that aspect of being online, but it's very hard to avoid getting tagged in negative reviews, seeing the things that. Sometimes you're like, did you mean that as a compliment? Like, why would you put my name on there? But it's being, I also am not that well known. So we always talk, the goal is always to be credit card famous, where people would never recognize you. Maybe you don't even have a social media. Many very successful, incredibly talented authors have no social media. I never really know if it moves the needle, right? So it's no social media, just your name is recognizable on a credit card.
Oh, is that what credit cards?
Credit card famous.
Credit card famous is the color of your credit card, or Dan's going to share a recent.
I'm not on Instagram. I'm actually looking for this review I got a couple days ago.
I love the people that tag you when they don't like something.
It's
That's my favorite too, writing for newspapers. Yeah, thanks for that. So make sure I get that.
Yeah, make sure just zinged in there. That was
you.
necessary. Yeah, it's because that's the purpose,
Sorry.
I think.
Yes.
Yes,
Dan,
can I read the
please
name?
read the review.
Can I
you can
reveal
do
her
it.
name? No, I won't. I'll keep
Don't
her
dox her.
private. But she has this review has 2 likes, and it's a 1-star review on Goodreads, and it says, "I'm so sorry. This was the worst book I have ever read. Tense constantly changes weird sexual tie bits that only ever could be written by a man, and basic medical jargon explained like the reader is a dummy." So, but I'm fortunate, Amber. I'm deeper into this, and this stuff doesn't bug me. Nor do the great reviews make me feel like I just find it interesting to hear what people have to say. But unless this person has only read a few books, I have a distinction of being the worst book she's ever read. So I made an impact with her, right?
There's something to be said for that, though, right? There's something to be said for that. I agree. Well, what did they always say? If you're going to believe your good review, you got to believe your bad review, right? So don't pick any of it up. But I find, I'm in a business where people can get to you too, and I find sometimes the creativity of some of them are great, but I just don't understand, who's got the time to do this?
Yeah, it's a very.
I don't think this review took long to write.
Judging by the changing tenses.
Well, I get it. Judging by the changing tenses, but I'm also thinking I would be so back and forth with myself. Should I? Don't send it. I don't even do a Yelp. Yikes!
No,
Contact the restaurant directly, people.
But we
Don't
were
get
told
mad at
we
them.
were told there might be writers, usually in these and if there are any, and anytime I speak to writers, I always say the same thing, right? It is important to get feedback from people. I'm not talking about mean or loving Goodreads reviews, but as people you trust who will give you objective feedback. And one opinion doesn't really matter. It's such a subjective business. But when you see a theme, I always say when you see 3 or 4 people tell you the same thing about a character or a plot line, you have to listen to that, because in my experience, they're always right when you get some consensus among a few readers. So.
Yeah, and people can be very prescriptive, like this should happen, not that. And I think that's not the voice you hear so much as just ooh, that section needs to be looked at again, because people are responding to it, not necessarily in the way I was hoping. So yeah.
Well, anytime you put yourself out there, don't care. I mean, you probably run into that with decisions you've had to make on the fly in the middle of the ER when things are going on in the St. Paul's ER. Again, been there a couple times. It's a very active place.
Very, very few of my medical decisions are reviewed online.
No, I know.
but,
But I'm just saying about questioning. You know, we're all built to question ourselves. I think about everything, right? You know, and so who do you hand things to read to first off? Who's your first reader? I guess.
It's a gift and a curse probably, but my husband is, he's always the early reader, and he always says it's fun though, because he reads, I like it when he reads it as I'm writing it, so it's a good way to keep on pace, like for deadline, because you kind of want that response, and then it's also, like he said, it's like, you know, like a podcast or something that's released every, that you get a chapter every couple days or day if it's working well. But yeah, he's a very trusted reader, and also very gentle, because that's exactly what I need at that stage, like not really diving in.
Yeah, weirdly, Amber's husband is also my first reader.
Does Amber know?
Yeah, no, it's a little secret we have. No, I have a
little
few.
side hustle.
I have, I have two people who read same thing, chapter by chapter, podcast style, one of whom has been with me every book. Like, she's amazing, and it's so great. I have my daughters I sometimes hit up there. And I have a few friends. I like to get 5 or 6 different reads, and Robin Harding's been actually great. My last few books, she's read some first drafts of mine and I got a chance to give her some feedback on the haters, so it's great when you have a writer friend you trust to get that.
Well, you guys seem to have a bit of a community of, right? Do you sit around and talk about weird things to do to people in books? I mean, because I've interviewed so many of you collectively over the year, or separately over the years, and then find out after, like so and so said this and that, and
I think we talk about weird things that happen in the publishing industry.
Right.
Yeah, that's what we. But yeah, it's like a nice group. There's a whole network of creativity here. Like going up to the Sea to Sky. Like, and I run a crime writers panel at the Whistler Writers Festival every year, and so I've been able to have a lot of people who are local, awesome thriller crime writers, and also beyond that, kind of expanding into like true crime and softer mysteries, and that's been an amazing way to meet people, including Dan. But he joined virtually because it was during the weirdness of the pandemic, and this is the first time we're meeting in real life.
Yeah.
Well, that's a full circle moment, because now that I know you're hosting crime panels, I know that you will be able to take somebody out without us figuring out, because you've got it all covered. So now's the time, folks. Any of you guys got some questions out there? If you could just speak up, and then we'll go from there. Yep, in the back.
thanks. It's great to meet you, Bob. I look forward to that event. Thank you for that'll be great. You know, I'm trying to think. Probably about a year and a half. But in terms of writing the first draft, usually takes me about 4 to 6 months. And then, you know, more and more, I love, I mean, I don't know, we got other writers here. I used to hate the editorial process. I used to hate the second, third, but now that's my favorite part. Like I've moved from not liking the first draft as much. It's so much fun to be able to try to make something better than starting from scratch. So, yes, I do way more. And Amber and I now share an editor who I love. I know you've just had one book with her. I'm now on my third book with her, fourth, and she's just so wonderful and so engaged and so collaborative, and it really helps. So, yeah, so it's about a year and a half, I'd say, from start to finish.
Yeah, she is absolutely fantastic. I thought it seems like you're on like a book a year pace. I have always, like, do you have some manuscripts like that you set aside and you're working on, or are you working on things like concurrently? I'm always so curious about your process because you're an ER doctor and a novelist, and you're so prolific. That's been always the question. Sorry, I'm jacking the question period just for a brief moment. But how do you do it? Like, you write, what's your system?
Yeah, it's kind of my favorite hobby. I tend to write in flashes, you know, and when I get momentum on a novel, I mean, I've got some witnesses here who can attest to.
I was going to say, your daughters is there. Is Dad always locked away in his study writing?
But
no, so. Yeah, you got this, Dan.
But yeah, but I tend to, you know, I am, I think, you know, as a thriller writer, I find that the pace, you know, as an ER doc, I'm used to being overwhelmed, and I kind of like that as a writer too. When I love the feeling like I got to finish this. I set deadlines on myself that are unrealistic. So I do tend to have a book a year, but I come back to, you know, right now I'm editing 2 different manuscripts and coming back to them. So, like, yeah, so but once it takes me a while to get that first 50 pages or whatever, but once I reach a certain mark, it's my OCD, my ADD, all my psychiatric diagnoses kick in and start.
And all your excellent training as an
Yeah,
ER physician,
yeah, exactly.
Dan. And anybody
So
else?
anymore.
Sorry? You have an editing question? Sorry, can you speak up just a little bit? Sure.
What an excellent question.
That's a really good question.
I mean, I have not written other kinds of books. Like, these are the only kinds of books that I write so far. But what I find tricky is I write my first draft very, very lean. Imagine The Sims, just kind of moving from place to place. They're like just doing what I need them to do. So the reveal is really quite hidden, you know. But then when I start adding layers, which is what I do in subsequent edits, I find sometimes it's really hard to balance like how much information you provide, what's necessary to continue keeping someone curious and interested in wanting to turn the page without totally blowing it. Yeah, it is, I think, one of the most challenging parts of editing, and that's exactly when it happens for me. Is that true for you?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Fortunately, I write from a very loose outline, so my killers change, my stories change, everything changes, you know, as I get into it. But it's true, when you come back and you do something, and then you have to go back. But I find it's not that hard. For some reason, things just, you know, I don't know if you find this, Amber, but work out. So you go back, you have to change a couple chapters, but it's still, you know, but it's not a reason not to do something, to go back. It's, you know, and one of the things I do, again, unsolicited advice for writers out there, I keep as I write, I keep a summary document. I don't know if you do this, Amber, of all my early chapters. So then when I need to reference, it doesn't have any, they're like maybe 6, 7 bullet points about each chapter, but anything the key that happens, so I can always reference back to, oh, I need to change this, I need to, so yeah.
It's your murder wall.
Yeah, basically, right? People, that's such
We've
a
all seen those
cliche.
shows. It's your murder wall. Yeah.
But we do it in text, which makes sense, right? Like, for me, putting all over a wall, I wouldn't even look at it. Like,
really?
I would, it's in my head. And yeah, I definitely do that. And I've gotten better with those kinds of pieces like sometimes some parts of writing are technical, and so you build better tools. Yeah, and that's certainly one of them. It's, continuity, it matters.
But I really, having worked with a lot of editors over the years, I really don't think they get enough credit. You have no idea how much editors change books and stuff. I mean, and they get hardly credited, minimally in the acknowledgments, but sometimes they're effectively co-writers, or sometimes they're full-on ghostwriters of famous people, and it's not really fair. I mean, it's their lot in life. And ironically, Amber and I worked with who was a high-level editor who's become the top New York Times best-selling author, Anita Pross, but she was at Simon & Schuster. She was the VP and she was the senior editor, and she used to rewrite some of her clients or some of the authors' books, and she did it so well. She thought, I can just do this myself. So
and then she blew it out of the water. I love that. Is one of the most incredible stories in publishing, like that exists sort of in the contemporary world. Like it is true. Editors are like, to me, the most amazing piece that happens every time I get an edit back is, how do you read this so many times and still keep picking up on these pieces? How are you able to give it almost like a clean, fresh look every time you go back to the manuscript? Because at that stage, often you feel kind of burnt out yourself, and you're thinking really high. Well, for me anyway, I'm thinking really high level about how, like, the mechanics of how everything is working, and does it, like, the minutia starts to really fall away. And they are still like, no, wait, wasn't her coat red? And you're like, oh, yes, no, definitely red, yes. Silly me. I always mix those up.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Some questions? Oh, yep.
What's your favorite part of writing the story? Like, is it the director, the environment, or
Oh. Did everybody hear that?
that's a good question. It's what's our favorite part of writing the story? For me, it's the point when I become engaged in the story, in the sense that the characters start to feel kind of real to me, and the story feels real to me, and it just feels like there's this wind at your back, after you struggle to build, your little world for the first few chapters. Suddenly it starts to take off, and it's like a high when it happens. I don't know if you feel the same way, but that's my favorite part of the writing process.
Yeah, I mean, I always struggle when people are like, oh, writing, it's the worst thing ever. I can't believe I have to be a writer, because I love writing, all of it. I feel like when it's going really well, it's like I get to tell myself a story, like imagine a story and sort of read it at the same time. And that's such an amazing feeling. I write chronologically, and that's why. And I think that's also why I write in this genre, because it's so, it has to be really propulsive, right? And that's, keeping me there, too.
So you write chronologically. So
Yes.
I know there's lots of famous authors over the years always say things about where they are in a story when they start to write or not write. Very famously, endings are there first. What about you guys? Have you got them? Well, no, you just admitted your murderer can change, your killer can change.
That's fascinating to me. I write from I've written books in many different ways, from what would be the equivalent of the Charlie Day scrawl on the wall, on just several sheets of foolscap paper, which were really ooh, don't want to show anyone else these. To now, where I write a full synopsis, but 3 to 5 pages, high-level plot points, 3 acts, what is happening in each of them. And so I know, because for me, the challenging part is always the middle. I think it's really interesting that that's where you pick up steam and you get really into it, because I like the setup. I always know the beginning and the end very well. Okay. I just have to get there, and that's sometimes the part where it's how do you do this again?
Was that term, I've heard a lot in the last couple of years, planners or pantsers, So what that means is you either plan out in a very detailed, where you know everything that's going to happen in your story, you know all your characters, Scott Turow is a very famous planner where his outlines were almost as long as his book.
Also Sam Bailey.
Sam Bailey.
Samantha Bailey writes
incredible
outlines.
And then there's the flying by your seat of the pants, and that's where the pantser term comes from. And I'm very much in that school. I mean, I do, by a third of the way in, it's not like my killer changes on the last paragraph but it's just, but I never go back and look at outlines again. My original story pitch or synopsis. I just, because otherwise I find it too handcuffing.
Never. You never. You're just
Well,
going.
hardly ever. Sometimes,
Wow,
yeah, but
that's so
otherwise, but I find it really limiting because then I can't do.
Yeah.
So I just find it more freeing. Just to, I remember it, but I never go back and look at the specifics.
You just let them go. I think I'd be very limited by a 40-page outline. Like, I would get so bored. I'd be like, I practically wrote this already. Like, it's done. I like to be able to discover, like, how are you going to do this? But I feel like I stand in admiration when other people tell me about their writing process. I'm always like, whoa, that's so different. But I would lose it. I would lose, like, the thread. I wouldn't be able to keep going. I'd be like, what just happened? And where are we going? Maybe that's a memory thing.
Well, we've already established already that I don't have a lot of attention to detail. It's not to say, I like to think at the end of that how should I put this? The storyline feels organic and authentic, and that, well, you've read some, but I just don't want to be handcuffed at the beginning, because then I know I would block, I would stop if I if I felt too constrained by sticking to an exact synopsis.
Well, it's also funny too, I would imagine when you're going to write it, is you don't want to make those characters so cut and dry either, because that's not humans, right? Like, I mean, if your outline, I can't imagine if your outline is completely down to exactly, I mean, maybe if you're doing a period piece, we need to know what her shoes look like exactly. But I would find maybe sometimes you get a little stuck if you're so hung up with the minutia.
But like, this is the thing.
Right?
Like, everyone's process
Yeah.
is so wildly different.
Yeah.
Like CL Polk, who's I was on a panel with a couple months ago, and they are amazing fantasy writer.
Yeah.
Where all these details, like everything about, like, for them, it's like a lot of costuming, and that's like actually their way into the story. And I was like, what? I mean, we have to keep it lean, right? Keep it going. Like, it's a different way. I mean, I don't often describe characters. I don't I do, like, sort of high level, and that's what I include in my synopsis too. Like, if they have a particular characteristic, if there's like hair color, eye color, and those pieces, so that you don't mess it up. But
it's in a thriller, you making a contract, like, you guys picking up one of our books and spending 8 hours of your lives reading it is an incredible, gift. But you're making a commitment to your reader that there is going to be suspense, that's going to be propulsive. Now, there should be interesting characters. There should be readable, ideally good prose, and great, and great dialogue. But first and foremost, you have to keep that sense of heightened suspense going. You have to, keep your readers on edge, at least at some points in the novel. And so, we have that contract with our readers.
that's such a cool way to think about it. But yeah, like, and when I wrote my first book, there was a chapter in it that I thought, truly to this day, like, it was probably a very beautiful piece of writing. But my husband looked at it and said, so what's the point of this? Like, does anything, what is, and like, oddly.
This is your gentle reader?
Yeah, well.
He's not that mean to you, is he, Dan?
No,
He's much more gentle with Dan. And oddly enough, like, given, like, current, like, pop culture, like, we have always called it the baby deer chapter, because it was about, like, a moment when, like sisters find a baby deer. Because it was like one of those sort of kill your darling moments, right? Yeah. And you have to be able to do that, like, particularly, I think, in this genre, like, every chapter really must serve and, like, keep you going, especially after, like, that first 50 pages you were talking about.
Yeah. One more question, and when we wrap up. Oh, sorry. Well, we'll do two. You guys okay if we do two?
Yeah.
Okay. At the back, we'll start there.
Yeah, I'm just curious, if you had to write in another literary genre, what genre would you find yourself in?
Do you know? So Stephen King often, like, says that you write what you read. Okay, so if that is true, and also this weird idea I have in my head, and my very deep love for the work of Blake Crouch, I think I would probably start, like, going into, like, a speculative fiction kind of realm. Like, I have this idea in my head that's like, oh my gosh, I could, like, all the people in publishing are going to be like, no, absolutely no, because that's so highly discouraged. I don't know if you found that. I mean, I shouldn't, like, universalize it, but you want to, like, I've always been very strongly encouraged to stay in genre.
I've written some historical fiction, and I loved it. I wrote, a trilogy. It took a ton of research, and I'd love to get back to it one day. It's a tough genre right now. It's like romance and rom-com is dominating, and thrillers are doing very well. Some thrillers, anyway.
Remember I told you to read Horse. Read
Yeah,
Horse.
Horse.
Yeah.
But I'd love to get back to it. It's really if I could find that thing I was passionate about, like I found before. So I think that would be my hope.
Sorry, woman in the search.
I just wanted to ask, you mentioned YouTube, but I wanted to ask Dan, really, how do you do you do a lot of research? Do you read a lot around? I mean, to use a lot of, I'm going to call them zeitgeist, medical zeitgeist sometimes. Do you read a lot around? Do you get your personal experience?
Bug your colleagues.
Yeah. Well, all my colleagues are terrified I'm putting them in my novel. I once. I can't tell this.
Come on, Daniel, tell us.
That sounds
Without the
juicy.
Okay. So honestly, the first book I wrote had a character who is a very mid-level. As pandemic came out, had a mid-level FBI bureaucrat who wasn't a hero or a villain. She was just kind of in the way. She was kind of obstructive and not very likable. And I wrote this book, and her name that I used as a character sounded, in fiction you can't, or any books, well, non-fiction, you got to stick with real names, but in fiction you can't use, readers tend to associate characters by their first letter of their name, so you can't have two names that sound too close. It confuses readers. So my editor made me change it. So I took this kind of name of that was not very common, but happened to be a charge nurse, a veteran charge nurse who was very, was very funny and very, and I walked into the emergency one night, and I changed the name after the book was written, right? And I walked into the emergency, and she's glaring at me. She goes, "I read Pandemic." I said, "Oh." I said, "What did you think?"
Oh.
And she said, "You put me in the book." And I said, "No, I didn't." I said, "Yeah, you did. You made me a bitch who never gets laid." And and so I learned the characters' names. But to get back to your question, I research a lot. And now that I've discovered AI, by the way, it's amazing for doing like ChatGPT. Like I used to do a ton of Google. Like when I wrote the historical novels, I went to Shanghai, but a lot of the stuff I do online. And I have the luxury and honor of working with a lot of very smart physician experts on things, and they'll always give me feedback. And I know a few RCMP officers and a few VPD, and they'll give me some help too, so it's great.
Yeah, and the research is so solid. I sort of on that note, started a job. I have a day job. I work as a fundraiser, but hopefully I will quit it someday. But I started the job, and my new boss was like, "Hey, I really want to read your book. That's cool. You write." And I was like, "Oh, great." And when she started it, I had to really explain the fact that I had named my main character her name. And I had like written the book well before, you write a book years off sometimes before it gets published, a year at like 6 months before, and it was such a weird bit of like sort of dissonance where it felt personal, but it really wasn't. Like it came out so soon after I had met her, but I had written it before I ever knew her, so it was really strange.
Well, everybody.
By the way, if I can get in, this woman who gave me the 1-star good review, her name is going to be on one of my upcoming novels.
Good. Well, that
She won.
You have to enjoy it. Yeah, and she kind of wins, you're right.
Yeah,
But still,
she earned it.
She earned it.
Absolutely.
Well, everybody, thanks for coming out tonight. Books over there. You guys are going to stand and sign and meet people.
Thank you. Thanks, Dana, for amazing job.